further to confirm Kash Patel to serve as Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigations for the next...
Order.
To serve as Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigations for the next 10 years. 10 years, Mr. President. If Senate Republicans confirm Mr. Patel, I believe they will come to regret this vote, probably sooner rather than later. I, for one, am convinced that Mr. Patel has neither the experience, the judgment, nor the temperament to lead this amazing criminal investigative agency. It appears my Senate Republican colleagues are ignoring the many red flags in Mr. Patel's record, probably because they fear retribution from the President and Mr. Musk. Let me be clear. This is not a partisan issue. During my time in the Senate, I have voted for 4 FBI director nominations before this one. Each one was clearly a Republican, and I voted for them nevertheless. Historically, the Federal Bureau of Investigation has been apolitical. I oppose Mr. Patel because he is dangerously politically extreme. He has repeatedly expressed his intention to use our nation's most important law enforcement agency to retaliate against his political enemies. Even before President Trump took office, Mr. Patel announced that he would force out FBI Director Chris Wray, who he nominated in his first term before firing the former FBI Director Jim Comey. The director is the only political appointment at the FBI. Congress took steps to ensure that this agency remains as apolitical as possible by providing for a single term of 10 years for a director and subjecting the appointment to the advice and consent of the Senate. 50 years ago, we made this reform. We may see it all fall to ashes today. But as we have seen for weeks now, the Trump administration purge of the FBI is a political exercise that is spread to service career officials. There's an association of FBI agents, and the 2 leaders of that association came to see me recently in my office to talk about this situation. Both of them are women. One is serving 17 years in the career job at the FBI, and the other 22. They were quick to add that their fathers had been FBI agents before them. It was clearly in their blood. They came to tell me about the situation at the FBI today because of this transition and because of the prospect of Kash Patel heading their agency. They said morale has never been lower. They've gone through, many of them, gone through many presidential transitions and have never seen anything like this. The declaration that is required now of FBI agents as to whether they were participating in the investigation of the January 6th rioters who assaulted this United States Capitol building. Let's be honest about what's going on here. There's an effort to have Soviet-style historical revision. The Trump administration and the people that they're pushing into leadership have to basically pass a loyalty oath in terms of the outcome of the previous presidential election and what happened on January 6th. They're somehow asked to ignore the obvious that we see on videotape over and over again. The rioters assaulted this Capitol. It was so dangerous that the Vice President of the United States, sitting in your chair, was physically removed by the Secret Service for fear that he was going to be hurt if he stayed in that position. Those of us who are on the floor of the Senate on January 6th were asked to evacuate this chamber as quickly as possible. This was not simply a question of tourists getting out of line. These people who assaulted this U.S. Capitol building were hell-bent on stopping the constitutional process of counting the electoral votes in the 2020 election. And now, FBI and others are being asked to say the opposite, that this wasn't somehow a breach of law, a horrendous, terrible chapter in the history of this country, and that there was danger afoot. Because the president has given a sweeping pardon to the 1,600 who were prosecuted for trespass, seditious conspiracy, the use of firearms in the Capitol, and the like, we were supposed to somehow discount this as a significant moment in American history. It was. And for the FBI agents who participated in the investigation of that day, I say they were doing their job, and they did it well. And now to remove them from the FBI because of that has obviously hurt the morale of the FBI agency and made them stop and wonder what the future holds for them. If another president comes in with another political agenda, will they be the victims again? As we've seen for weeks now, the Trump administration's purge of the FBI is a political exercise that has spread to senior career officials. In the FBI long history, this has never happened before. This purge has dramatically weakened the FBI's ability to combat national security threats and make America it has made America less safe. Senior leaders with collectively hundreds of years of experience have been forced out, creating a leadership vacuum. Thousands of line agents fear losing their jobs simply because they were assigned to work on cases involving the January 6th attack or President Trump. I have heard directly from FBI agents who now fear for their safety and the safety of their families. To understand why, let me tell you about a January 6th rioter named Edward Kelly. Mr. Kelly was convicted of assaulting law enforcement during the attack on the U.S. Capitol. We saw it, didn't we? In terms of videotapes that show our law enforcement agents trying to stand their ground in this Capitol building, being beaten back and assaulted by these mobs. Mr. Kelly was convicted of assaulting law enforcement, and he was given a full and unconditional pardon by Donald Trump. But Mr. Kelly has also been convicted in his home state of Tennessee of conspiracy to murder the FBI agents who investigated his role in the January 6th attack. Understand this. Now he is arguing that President Trump's blanket pardon of Mr. Kelly should cover his attempt to kill FBI agents. When asked about the possible firings of career FBI officials at his confirmation hearing, Mr. Patel, under oath, and I quote, said, "I don't know what's going on right now at the FBI." Mr. President, that's not true. Thanks to multiple brave whistleblowers, we now know that Mr. Patel likely committed perjury in making that statement. Even before being confirmed as an FBI director, Mr. Patel is already directing the ongoing purge of honorable career public servants. Despite his status as a private citizen, he has no right to be part of this awful process. I urge my Republican colleagues, seriously, consider these credible whistleblower allegations before you vote on Mr. Patel's nomination. Mr. Patel's claim about an FBI purge were not his only misleading statements under oath. At his hearing, Mr. Patel implausibly told me he could not recall Stu Peters, a man who's been identified as an anti-Semitic Holocaust denier. I asked him repeatedly, what about Stu Peters? Don't know the man, don't recognize the name. This is simply not true. Considering that Mr. Patel appeared on Mr. Peters' podcast 8 times, Mr. President, 8 times, and he couldn't recall the man's name. And Mr. Peters has since revealed that he and Mr. Patel directly communicate via their personal cell phones, quote, constantly. Constantly was the word he used. As far as Patel was concerned, under oath, never heard of the man. Why in the world would he do that? Why would Mr. Patel admit the obvious? 8 podcasts and constant communication with this man? And an even larger question, what is he doing as a man who wants to direct the FBI in concert with anti-Semitic Holocaust denier Stu Peters? What is going on here? Is he showing good judgment? Is this the kind of person you want to put in charge of 38,000 criminal investigators? Mr. Patel also claimed, quote, he didn't have anything to do with the recording of the so-called January 6th prison choir, which included at least 6 rioters who violently assaulted police officers. Mr. Patel thinks there's something interesting, maybe even amusing, about the fact that he created a choir of these individuals who had been prosecuted for what they did on January 6th. Here's what Mr. Patel said to Steve Bannon after he denied knowing anything about this recording before the Judiciary Committee recently. He said to Steve Bannon, quote, "We got this idea to record the January 6 prisoners who recite the national anthem every night from the DC prison. Then we took that to the studio, so we mastered and digitized that." So on Steve Bannon's show, he is the mastermind behind this recording of these prisoners saying something about the national anthem every night. That particular tape that he created of the January 6th choir was taken to Trump rallies too and played as some kind of interesting display of what Patel insists are just political prisoners. One of Mr. Patel's choir boys, Julian Khater, Khater, he was convicted of assaulting Capitol Police officers with pepper spray. One of those officers was Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick. Brian Sicknick suffered multiple strokes and died the day after the attack. Mr. Khater was one of the people who assaulted him. Mr. Patel has called these violent January 6 rioters, and I quote, political prisoners. That includes Guy Reffitt. Guy Reffitt was sentenced to 87 months in prison for his role in the January 6th assault. 87 months. Mr. Reffitt brought a gun to the Capitol on January 6th and recorded himself saying the following, which I'll paraphrase because I don't want to use profanity on the floor of the Senate. Quote, "We're all going to drag them out kicking and screaming. I just want to see Pelosi's head hit every effing stair on the way out, and Mitch McConnell too. F them all." Mr. Reffitt's 19-year-old son, Jackson, turned him into law enforcement after the attack, despite Reffitt's threats to shoot Jackson and his sister. Here is what Reffitt said to his own children, quote, "If you turn me in, you're a traitor. And you know what happens to traitors. Traitors get shot." Mr. Reffitt received a full and unconditional pardon from President Trump. Guess where he was on January 30th this year? Back at the Capitol complex at Mr. Patel's confirmation hearing. Here's what Mr. Reffitt posted on social media from the hearing room, quote, "Present and in support of Kash Patel, as the leftist commies continue to spew lies, misinformation, and disinformation, my man is clean house Kash," quote unquote. Stu Peters, constant communication, Holocaust denier. This gentleman, he's become a hero too for his appearance before the committee, and we're all commies for questioning Kash Patel's politics and what it's led to. These are Mr. Patel's allies: Stu Peters, Julian Khater, Guy Reffitt. On the other hand, consider who is warning us about Mr. Patel. Former Trump officials who know him, like Attorney General Bill Barr, CIA Director Haspel, Defense Secretary Mark Esper, and National Security Advisor John Bolton. All of these were Republican appointees who worked with Patel, who know him well, and warn us not to do this. Don't give this responsibility to this man. All Republican appointees. Mr. Patel has left a long trail of grievances, lashing out at anyone who is not completely aligned with him. He calls Democrats, quote, vindictive, evil, and vicious, and repeatedly attacks Republican senators who don't toe the MAGA line. I've read Mr. Patel's book, Government Gangsters. It includes an enemies list at the end of the book, 60 names, members of the deep state, in the word of Kash Patel, which includes distinguished public servants from both political parties. What do they all have in common, the 60 people on this hit list? From Attorney General Bill Barr and Merrick Garland to former FBI directors Bob Mueller and Chris Wray, they've all had the misfortune of crossing paths with the vindictive Kash Patel. Mr. Patel claims he respects law enforcement, but his words and actions demonstrate his disdain for the FBI. He has said on day one he plans to, quote, shut down the FBI headquarters, and he's falsely claimed that the FBI, quote, was planning the January 6th event for a year beforehand. There is no truth to that statement, Mr. President, and he is casting aspersions on the FBI that are undeserved. Mr. Patel's record demonstrates that he's dangerous, inexperienced, and dishonest. He cannot serve as an effective FBI director. Mr. Patel has been crystal clear that he plans on using the FBI's vast surveillance and investigative authority to, quote, come after, close quote, the president's enemies. It is shocking that my Republican colleagues are willing to support him, despite the serious threat he poses to our national security. And I'm sorry to say I believe they will quickly come to regret this vote. When I think of giving this man a 10-year tenure as director of the leading criminal investigative agency in the world, I cannot imagine a worse choice. You want the person who has that job and that power to destroy people simply by investigation, to show some temperament and some judgment. Kash Patel shows just the opposite. He is neither qualified nor prepared to assume this responsibility. I will be voting no and plead with my Republican colleagues. Please think twice before creating this situation and making it even worse.